The summer of 1835 in Charleston was not merely hot, it was a punishment. The drought had settled over the lowcountry like a suffocating shroud, turning the lush indigo fields brittle and hardening the swamps into cracked earth. While the enslaved population suffered starvation and brutal rationing, the city's wealthy elite, whose fortunes were built on the sweat and starvation of others, continued to dine on feasts. At the center of this opulent cruelty was Silas Telford, a planter who had shrewdly converted his substantial indigo wealth into grain speculation. Telford's massive, newly filled granary, a three-story symbol of his monopoly, stood on the edge of the city, a glistening mountain of hoarded food towering over the starving urban poor and enslaved communities. That granary was hope locked away, and its existence mocked the empty stomachs of everyone around it. But on a sweltering August night, that symbol of greed was consumed in a breathtaking inferno. The fire was so intense it lit up the entire harbor, and the sound of the structural timbers collapsing was described in court records as a sound of finality. Within hours, a season's worth of precious grain was nothing but smoldering ash. The shock wave that rippled through the planter class was not just about the monetary loss, it was the chilling realization of the deliberate, surgical nature of the attack. Arson was the ultimate act of resistance, but this was different. This fire required access, intelligence, and an intimate understanding of the building's weak points. Telford immediately suspected organized rebellion, perhaps a plot hatched in the rice swamps. But the truth was far more terrifying to them. The perpetrator was located not in the fields, but in the most trusted domestic sphere of the city, Ilara. She was Telford's cook, a woman whose culinary skill was only exceeded by her quiet, observant nature. She had the run of his house, she knew his schedules, and she was the last person anyone would suspect of bringing down the entire local food supply. What drove this model domestic slave, this highly valued cook, to risk a guaranteed death sentence for a single act of spectacular, terrifying sabotage? Before we delve into the clandestine urban network that protected her and the true motive buried in the city's starvation, subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and comment your state below. Tell us where you are watching from. Ilara's decision to burn the granary was not born of spontaneous rage, it was a desperate, tactical response to economic warfare waged by her owner. To understand the logic of the flames, we must first understand the drought's economic impact on the city's enslaved population. While Telford was stockpiling grain and selling it at inflated, crisis-level prices to his fellow planters, the meager rations provided to his own staff and the other urban slaves were cut to near nothing. The cook, Ilara, saw this crisis unfold daily. She was responsible for preparing the rich, extravagant meals for the Telford family, while simultaneously knowing that the men, women, and children who slept in the quarters were slowly starving. She saw the true cost of the drought, the emaciated bodies, the desperate scavenging, and the utter indifference of the people she served. The archival records, particularly the insurance claims filed after the fire, reveal the planters' fear that the fire was a statement about food hoarding. Telford and his associates didn't just lose grain, they lost the power that came with controlling the supply in a time of scarcity. Ilara's motive was purely pragmatic: eliminate the source of the monopoly and force the remaining meager supplies onto the market, momentarily driving prices down or forcing the powerful to share. But how did a domestic cook, monitored far more closely than any field hand, gain the necessary freedom and materials to execute such a large-scale act of sabotage? The police initially fixated on a white rival of Telford's, or perhaps a drunken mistake, entirely missing the meticulous planning undertaken right under Telford's roof. What the investigation failed to grasp was that Ilara was not acting alone. She was the chosen agent of a sophisticated, invisible network of resistance that thrived in the shadows of Charleston's bustling ports and markets. The reason the official investigation stalled for weeks, despite the massive rewards offered for the culprit's capture, was the impenetrable silence of the city's black community. Urban enslaved people, unlike their counterparts on the large, isolated plantations, utilized a complex, overlapping web of communication, the whisper network. These were the draymen, the market sellers, the seamstresses, and the dockworkers who moved freely throughout the city, exchanging news, rumors, and, crucially, information on their owners' routines. Ilara, as a high-ranking house cook, occupied a uniquely strategic position within this structure. She heard the gossip of the plantation owners, she knew Telford's exact schedule for transporting the grain, and she had access to the kitchen fires, the very tool of her resistance. The rehook here is the realization, noted in marginalia of the trial records, that the fire was started by a meticulously planned application of pitch and slow-burning charcoal placed in the lowest, most vulnerable part of the wooden structure. This suggests she had outside help acquiring the materials and, perhaps more importantly, an alibi. Every time the white authorities questioned someone from the enslaved community, they were met with blank stares and practiced ignorance. The city officials realized with chilling clarity that Ilara had been cloaked by a shield of silence that spanned hundreds of people. The true crime in the eyes of the white community was not the arson itself, but the unity it represented, the shocking proof that the seemingly contented, compliant slaves living in their own homes were capable of organizing mass, coordinated defiance. The realization sent a shiver through the city. If a trusted cook could bring down a granary, what else could they do? The slow wheels of justice eventually turned, driven less by hard evidence and more by the necessity of restoring order and breaking the shield of silence. Ilara was finally arrested weeks later, based largely on the testimony of a rival house slave coerced into providing circumstantial details about her movements near the granary. The trial was less about determining guilt and more about performing power for a terrified city. It was held in the stifling heat of the Charleston courthouse, a venue designed to project the absolute authority of the planter class. Ilara, dressed simply, stood silent throughout the proceedings, her composure unsettling the jury and the court. The dramatic heart of the trial lay in the cross-examination of Silas Telford himself. Under questioning, Telford was forced to admit the desperate state of the food supply in his quarters, inadvertently confirming the motive for the crime. He spoke of Ilara's competence and trust, highlighting the profound sense of betrayal felt by the planter class. The prosecution's argument centered entirely on the symbolic nature of the act. This was not mere revenge, but a blow against the very infrastructure of the economy. They argued that if a slave could decide that economic inequality justified the burning of property, then the entire structure of the Rice Coast society was forfeit. Ilara offered no defense, she presented no testimony. Her silence was her most powerful weapon. It forced the court to acknowledge the conditions of her existence without ever uttering a defiant word. This profound lack of self-justification left the jury struggling not just with the facts, but with the terrifying implications of her stoicism. She had acted not out of desperation, but out of cold, tactical conviction. The verdict, delivered swiftly, was predictable: guilty. The sentence, mandatory for the destruction of such valuable property, was death by hanging. But the execution of Ilara did not extinguish the fire she started. The Granary Fire of 1835 became a pivot point in Charleston's history, not for the legal precedent it set, but for the profound psychological wound it inflicted upon the ruling class. The total value of the grain lost exceeded all other property damages in the city that year, significantly exacerbating the famine and forcing the immediate, though temporary, release of other hoarded food supplies onto the open market. Ilara, through a single, calculated act of sabotage, had momentarily won a small victory for her community, proving that resistance did not always require muskets or open rebellion. The ultimate takeaway from Ilara's story is the enduring power of the tactical strike. She used her position of trust and her profound knowledge of her master's operations against him, turning the symbols of his wealth into the instruments of his ruin. The city archives show a marked increase in insurance rates for storage facilities immediately following the fire and a chilling, paranoid surge in patrols aimed specifically at domestic staff. The planters learned that the faithful servant was a fiction, and that the people deemed powerless often held the most dangerous power of all, the power of intimate access, the power of strategic timing, and the power of fire. What do you think of Ilara's choice? Was this a crime, or an act of revolutionary justice against starvation? Leave your comment below. If you found this forgotten tale of resistance compelling, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into history's most dramatic turning points.